Hi there. So I'm going to be covering activity 3 that we did in class. Today is July 2nd. So let's go ahead and get right in. So the concept or social work value that I learned from the activity was a pretty interesting one. So here's kind of an overview of it. When we were doing the activity, as more people were to move ahead, and myself included, I found myself believing, and I know after class discussion that others did, that maybe it was assumed that these people maybe had a happy life, financially well off, that because of the privileges afforded to them, that their lives were happier, that they were better people even. And I think that somebody made a really good point. I believe it was Kara made a really good point that, and something that I thought about, but she brought it to my attention, was that even though that these people may be at the very front of the line, and it goes both ways, even though that these people are at the very back of the line, doesn't necessarily reflect their happiness, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the quality of those relationships discussed. An example that I thought of, or a couple examples, was such as the marriage. There's a question about marriage related to step forward if your parents are stayed together throughout your childhood. I personally was lucky enough to take a step forward, but it made me reflect on just because I took a step forward, and while I will just go ahead and admit to you that I did have my parents had a good relationship, never fought, no violence, nothing like that. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there are many couples and families that do struggle with domestic violence, abuse, poor parenting styles, what have you, that come from a marriage. And I thought that it was just because you've had parents that have been together for 20 years doesn't mean that they have a good marriage, doesn't mean that they're happy, doesn't mean that you're happy about it, doesn't mean that they were ever nice to you or anything like that. And then we look at the opposite end of it. There isn't, somebody that may have taken a step back at that point. Take a step back if your parents are no longer together. That individual may have had an incredibly, incredibly rich childhood as far as parental guidance goes and what they were able to experience with their parents, even if their parents weren't together. Their parents may have, been really great at coordinating that child and what that child is able to accomplish, and that child may have, really, really gotten a lot out of that relationship with those two parents, even if they weren't married or weren't together. And I just think that was something that was pointed out to me in class, and that's just important to consider. And I think that way of thinking, that model of thinking, can be applied to every question that was asked. That while you may take a step forward or you may take a step back, that does little to shine light on what could really be beneath the surface as far as your happiness, as far as your financial security and things like that, your emotional well-being. So I thought that was an interesting thing that was brought to my attention, and something that I wish I had thought about on my own, to be honest with you. Okay, so identify one area of knowledge. Moving on to question number 2. Identifying one area of knowledge or skill or value that I became aware of wanting to explore further. So while I am very well aware of what white privilege is, or I guess I've heard of it, I know that it exists, I know that I have it. There are certain circumstances where you hear, like an example would be, I know that I'm less likely to be stopped, pulled over, searched by law enforcement because of the color of my skin. I know that is white privilege, but I wanted to explore it a lot more than that. I wanted to quantify it, try and look at what experts think or what research is out there that can help me understand a little bit better what white privilege is exactly. So, on that note, I was able to do some research online. My source that I was able to look, I'm going to be looking down at some notes here. This is just, anyway, so I won't be looking at the camera very often here. But it came from The Root, the news organization The Root. And the first aspect that they explored was the disparities between African Americans and Caucasians in terms of education, employment, and spending. And so to begin with education, it talks about the privilege that white Americans often have over black Americans as far as where they go to school, what kind of schools they attend, and the funding that those schools receive. So according to the United States Department of Education, 6% of whites attended high poverty schools in 2014, 6% compared to 40% of black students attended high poverty areas. So again, that number was 6% of whites to 40% of African Americans. And that's a rate of 6 times more likely for black students to attend a low poverty education or a low poverty school. And it went on to show that there is actually research done that the more black and minority students that are within a school district, the less funding that school district will receive. How that is possible is beyond me. Not something I really knew or realized, and that study came from a study from Pennsylvania of 500 public schools in Pennsylvania. So that may be a small case study example, but I sure don't think so. So that is quantifiable. Whites are able, more likely, more often, are able to obtain a better education than blacks, and that's a privilege. Just in it, right there. That's what that is. The second thing I want to move into is employment. So this comes from the United States Department of Labor Statistics, and they show that, I'll start off with the employment rate. Unemployment rate in the United States is 8.1% for African Americans, and that rate drops to 4.3% for whites. So, why? You never know why exactly, but there are a couple of theories. One is just hiring prejudice. People believe that maybe blacks should be studying more, they should go to school longer, they should work more often, they should work more years before they can get the pay that they want. And I'm going to show you that that's just simply not true. So to help paint a picture of so as I said, that number was 8.1% for African Americans and 4.3% for Caucasians. That's the unemployment rate. So that was just the population as a whole. When we look at even educated African Americans and Caucasians, we see that that disparity is identical. So for college degrees, now I want to point out, while these employment rates I'm about to say are low, they don't actually reflect income. They don't reflect the type of employment status, whether that be part-time or full-time or anything else. So this is what it is, but it did help me to paint a picture of the privilege that whites do have in employment compared to blacks. The unemployment rate for African Americans is 4.3% as of 2014, and the unemployment rate for Caucasians with a college degree was 2.4%. So even then, it's almost double the rate of unemployment for African Americans that have college degrees. They are. You wonder why. I don't know why exactly. I can't even theorize. I don't know. But it's It's apparent that whites are being hired at a much higher rate than blacks that have the exact same education levels. Now let's look at experience. The Center for Economic and Policy Research shows that whites with the same age and same experience are twice as likely to be hired than blacks when they have the exact same resume. So, that leads you to believe that there's obviously employer prejudice for some reason toward African Americans. And that is a privilege in itself. That's a white privilege. Furthermore, as we look at experience again, it shows that there was a study done by the Pew Research Center for black men who have at least 11 to 20 years of work experience. They make 24% less than their white counterparts, and black women make 12% less than white women who have a work experience between 11 to 20 years. So a tremendous disparity. I mean, 75 cents on the dollar for black men compared to white men who have the same work experience. They're hired less when they have the same education. There's not a lot. What else can you do? You have the exact same experience as a white counterpart. You have the exact same education as a white counterpart. You have the exact same number of years experience. Your resume can even be the same, and it will, and you're still less likely to be hired. In that same study, it was showed that a black individual without a criminal record with the same experience as a white individual with a criminal record was still less likely to be hired than that white individual with a criminal record. Only facts. And the last thing that they covered in the article was spending. So I know I've been talking a long time, so I'll try and get through this a little quicker. They found that even when they took into consideration loan ratios, credit scores, debt, they found that Hispanics compared to whites are 78% more likely to have a high-cost mortgage than their white counterparts, and blacks are 105% more likely to have a high-cost mortgage than those of their white counterparts. So I believe that is a pretty quantifiable description of privilege. I was blown away. I think that's shocking. Obviously I know that whites have privilege over minority groups, but I didn't know it was that big. And I didn't know it was by official institutions. Official institutions. Good one. Okay. So that was not, I guess that answered number 3. That's what I learned. Sorry if that wasn't very clear. So 4, describe what surprised or interested you most professionally or personally during the experience, and how this experience will aid in building personal competency as a practitioner capable of engaging diversity factors for well-being of clients. So something that I learned or that surprised me was somebody said during the group that because that I personally do believe I have privilege, but that I would be unable to connect with someone who may not have the same amount of privilege. And I found that very interesting. And I thought that maybe they're right. Something I haven't really considered. I at first thought, well, I can relate just as well as anybody can to someone, And I thought about that, and I don't know what I don't know. You know what I mean? I hope that makes sense. But I thought about that more, and I realized that I need to be better about realizing when that circumstance may be way that may apply to my practice. If I were to have an individual that I may not fully understand what they're going through, even though I may have thought at one point that I did. I realize that I probably don't have as great a grasp on some clients' financial situations, emotional situations, as I thought I did, because I honestly don't. Maybe I don't have the experience necessary to adequately provide help the way that they need that. So when engaging with diverse clients, I just know that I need to be a lot more aware of that I personally believe I come from a place of privilege, both financially, emotionally, a lot of ways, I think. And I think that I didn't realize how that can actually affect how I practice with my clients. And I realize now that I need to be much more aware of that, and I need to be, it was humbling. I was humbled when I heard my classmates say that, because I realized that I'm probably wrong. And it's okay, that's okay. And B, to become an ethical leader by increasing self-monitoring needed to identify personal thoughts, patterns, biases, strengths, and affect. So to become an ethical leader, you want to make sure that you address the ethical considerations in any situation. And I think that before this discussion, I would have... I don't think I would have I would not have thought of my personal experiences, beliefs, how it had been for me growing up. I don't think I applied that well to situations of clients that may not have had the same thing that I did. And just a second, I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, I think I pretty much said it. I just think I need to become a lot more at self-monitoring myself, becoming more aware of where I did come from, so that I think I can more effectively, ask questions related to an individual situation instead of assuming that I may know, because I realize that I probably don't. And the best way to become And the best way to become an ethical leader, I think, is to explore the ethics of another situation, to explore your own ethical code, and to make decisions based off of that. Okay, well, I've talked long enough, I believe, so that's it.